Good afternoon once again. I am very excited to come back to you with our MEIS podcast, Middle East and Islamic Studies podcast. My name is Bassam Haddad. I am directing the program for Middle East and Islamic Studies at George Mason University. And our podcast features professors, students, alumni, as well as administrators related to the Middle East and Islamic Studies program. Today, we have the awesome two faculty members, Amal Amireh and Nathaniel Greenberg, with us to share their research and teaching, news and development, as well as activities they're involved in. And I'm very lucky to have had them join again on relatively short notice and at totally the wrong time in the summer when I'm supposed to leave you alone. So welcome to Mia's podcast, both of you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Again, as I've shared, this is a belief expose. It's a showcase of our faculty and their work. So I would start with asking you about your research, specifically the plans that you have, given, as I shared with our other interlocutors, given the changing nature of the world around us, changing not in the sense that we are surprised by these calls for justice, social justice, racial justice, gender equality, and so on, but also the receptivity of the general public to these issues that many of us have been working on for decades, and then now all of a sudden they're right front and center. So in that context, I also would like you to address your research and your teaching. But let's start with Amal, if you can share with us a few words about your own research trajectory and where you might be headed in that regard.
Yeah. First, thanks for having these podcasts and for including us. I'm glad to see you both. I haven't seen you in a long time because of this horrible, horrible year and a half we've been having teaching from home. So I'm really happy to be here. And yes, I've been thinking about this question, and in a sense, I've been hopeful, really hopeful recently about this aspect that you're mentioning. That with these calls for social justice, I feel like we've done a good job. I mean, and I say by we, it's the collective we who've been teaching about these things in our courses for really. I mean, I've been at George Mason for a long, long time, and you notice the change also in our students' receptivity. Like you have this, I think, what you call Generation Z. They are awesome. I mean, they're really open-minded. They have learned from about, let's say, okay, since we talk about Middle East, and I teach about Palestine to some extent, they have learned about social justice from, like, let's say, in other contexts, but now they can bring also that knowledge and apply it to the Middle East, apply it to Palestine. In addition to, actually, I really think, I mean, if you want us to talk about research, I mean, my research and my teaching, they're connected, right? Because it's hard not to have them connected, right? They have, like, in a way, two sides to them. One was always about how to correct the misrepresentations or challenge the misrepresentations of the Middle East, North Africa, the Arab world, Palestine, in my case, in the English-speaking context, the U.S., Britain, So part of my research and part of my teaching was always about addressing these stereotypes, misconceptions, Orientalism, and with a focus on issues relating to gender. Okay, gender and class, but mostly gender. And I think that work paid off. I think that work that many people, have been doing in the American Academy paid off, in that we have raised students who are aware. Our students became professors too, so they carry the torch, and I'm really pleased about that. In terms of my research, I mean, I started about, like, writing about um, you know translations and how they vary depending on different contexts. I focused, like, maybe my most well-known essay is the one about Nawala Sadawi, which actually has been resurrected recently because of her passing, and people are still interested in her, and also in the complex positionality she has, whether in the U.S. or in the Arab world. So I write about that. I write about reception generally of Arab women and actually male writers. So that's one of the trajectories that of my research, which I continue with, but maybe I'm not as passionate about as I used to be earlier, because as I said, we did a great job in this regard. Like, we addressed many of many of the stereotypes that uh, uh, superficial readings, the superficial understandings of issues relating to that part of the world. The other aspect of my research that always, went hand in hand with this interest is, how do we represent ourselves? How do we represent, uh, or how do writers, filmmakers in the Arab world represents themselves to themselves? Okay, so it's not only about how we are seen from the outside, but I think it's really important for us, at least for me. That's also a passion I have in terms of my research, also in my teachings, that because I'm interested in that part of the world, I'm interested in seeing how things are changing. Okay, in there. So how do we represent ourselves to ourselves is also important. So I also write about that. This book, for instance, that you're featuring the cover of, Bassam, Bad Girls of the Arab World, it's an edited collection that I have an essay in. The essay is called "They Are Not Like Your Daughters or Mine: Spectacles of Bad Women from the Arab Spring." And I thought I'll mention this because I know you, Bassam, you're interested in the Arab Spring. We're all interested in it and understanding it. And in this article, actually, the first part of the quote of the title, "They Are Not Like Your Daughters or Mine," is actually a quote from Sisi, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, before he became president of Egypt, when he was the head of the armed forces. And that was in reference to the women who were charging the military of subjecting them to virginity tests. So he was so dismissive of them, saying, no, no, these are bad girls. These are bad women. They are not like your daughters or mine. He's saying that to foreign journalists, actually, at the time. So in that article, for instance, I talk about how the big question I'm addressing is about how do Arab women become or go from being icons of resistance to being spectacles. Okay, and the two women I focus on in that article is the Tunisian Faideh Hamdi, who was accused of slapping Bouazizi and causing the Arab Spring, and the other one is the Libyan Iman al-Ubaidi, who accused Gaddafi forces of gang raping her. So I look at the reception of these women in the Arab context, with a little bit also in the Western context, to show how they get transformed, somehow how they are only allowed to be spectacles, not icons of resistance. And that has to do with the dynamics of gender and nationalism, which I would say is the bigger framework that I work with. How does gender inform nationalism? How is nationalism is gendered, okay, as informed by gender? So this is just one example of the kind of research I do. I did it also in the context of Palestinian literature or Palestinian culture during the Second Intifada, with the attention that the Palestinian suicide bombers were getting. So I did a study on how they were received in the Western context, and also complemented with a study how they were received in the Palestinian context. And you see the difference, and you see again the entanglement, okay, between nationalism and gender issues in two different contexts. Okay, so these are some of the research. The other recent work I've done that came out also as part of a collection is a book, is an article about Palestinian nationalism. The article is called Of Heroes and Men. And the sorry, the full title of Heroes and Men. It's about Palestinian national narrative, the crisis of masculinity in Palestinian post-Oslo narrative. So I'm focusing on works of literature that were published after the Oslo Agreement, which the infamous Oslo Agreement, and the way writers are trying to retell the Palestinian story, okay, uh, in light of the failures of Oslo. Because I think the three writers I talk about in this article, Ibrahim Nasrallah, Raja Shihade, and Raji Bathish, the three have different approaches to how to tell the Palestinian story, but they will all three agree that Oslo was a failure and a disaster, and perhaps, a third Nakba for the Palestinians. I don't know if I'm going too long. Please feel free to stop me. So that's kind of what I'm continuing to work on that. One maybe outlier in my work right now is an article I'm working on this summer about a novel I loved, Druze Belgrade, okay, which is by Rabi' Jaber, a Lebanese writer. It won the 2011 Arab Booker Prize, and it has not been translated into English yet, which is mystifying to me and frustrating because it's an excellent novel. I would love to teach it, but as a way to kind of, deal with it, I'm writing an article about it, though it's not out in English, but maybe this will, give it more attention. Also, it's just, as I said, I just love it and I have things to say about it. So, and the focus of that novel, in my reading of it, it's challenge to sectarianism in Lebanon, to the sectarian identity. Yeah.
That's that's a lot of work, Amal, and it's great to hear all of these about all these projects and articles and chapters and research that you've been doing. As I shared with my other colleagues that I interviewed here on this podcast, all of this gets me excited about putting together a workshop on pedagogy and research within the context of just George Mason, because we have enough brain trust to actually hold these conferences and invite our community and address this material locally at George Mason. Thank you very much, Amal. Yes, I didn't want to stop you because we were supposed to do 5 minutes each, but I didn't want to stop you. I wanted you to say everything because it was so interesting. We just might have to speed up towards the end on the other questions. Nate, thank you so much for coming again. And I don't know what to feature of your books because I know that you already came in before you even got your tenure with with a lot of publications. So I'll let you talk about your research and then we'll go to the teaching.
You did.
I know what I'm. Oh, am I muted? Can you hear me? Okay, I know what I'm teaching next year. Definitely, I want to teach Amal's essay for sure, and I think we need to be assigning Nawala Sadawi. Kid. I know she teaches it, but we need to do it in Arabic too. On research, I mean, yeah, I was entirely moved, like everybody, with the events of this last year. BLM. So what I really my research this year really doubled down on the problem of disinformation, the use of the sort of manipulation of social phenomena for political ends by counter-revolutionary forces, which is basically what the last book is about. And so I have an essay that just came out with the International Journal of Communication that addresses how Russian state media were covering the BLM protests in the United States for their Arabic language audience. And part of what led me to that, I mean, I was interested to see how BLM was being covered by the Arab news media. And so I gained access covertly to Alexa Analytics. I had already used my free trial. And so I took my wife's email and got a second free trial to use Alexa Analytics, which is pretty cool. It shows you like per keywords, and other metrics, what are the sort of the dominant media outlets on the internet. And I focused on Arabic language media. And what was shocking to me, I mean, I guess in a way not surprising, RT Arabic is like pummeling every other Arabic language like news outlet online, with the exception of Yom Sabah, the Egyptian one, which actually repeats a lot of RT Arabic on its website. So I was like, well, I better look at and see what RT Arabic is doing. And, it was not surprising. It was the same kind of like counter-revolutionary coverage that we saw vis-a-vis the Arab Spring. It basically just echoed Trump's rhetoric, painting BLM as violent, chaotic, secretly being funded by the clandestine sources and the like. But interesting, I think what the breakthrough was, and I had the opportunity to speak with a number of like former State Department officials and people, like in the media as well. Mohammed Al-Manshawi came and spoke to one of my classes in the spring. He's the senior DC senior correspondent for Al Jazeera, and getting his insight as well. But one of the things that I noticed, which is very interesting, RT Arabic repeats. They do what a lot of media does, is they syndicate. They take articles from other existing sources, including in English, like the New York Times and Reuters, and like well-known mainstream media outlets, CNN. But when looking more closely at this, and I did it as well with a group of students in the fall, the articles are strategically mistranslated to like amplify and escalate divisions, demonize the BLM protests, in ways that are sort of go beyond just the sort of like normal expediting of translated news articles. So in other words, very sort of insidious and interesting, fascinating. The article focuses on the end on a 10-part documentary series that came out called just Black Lives, and it was translated into Arabic. Yani Hayat Saud Mohem. And it's really incredible. I think it's a master study in long form propaganda. The way that it sort of depicts Black America as sort of like drug infested, violent. It's Trump's American Carnage, basically, in like a documentary. And so I really wanted to get at that, pick at that. People know I've been working on the problem of disinformation during and post Arab Spring. I've been doing had the opportunity to speak for the 10th anniversary of the Libyan uprising with the National Council on U.S.-Libya relations, and looking at there as well how like proxy communications actors have been shaping the conflict in Libya, and I'm continuing to work on that. I have some publication that I'm figuring out with that, and then just kind of trying to gauge the reception to the book. It's getting some reviews and stuff, which positive, and I'm getting some sort of inquiries. And I encourage students as well to sort of be grounded in your expertise. For me, my background is in literature and narrative aesthetics specifically, but to just kind of be open to new research opportunities, new inquiries. So I'm doing that, and let me stop myself before I take up too much time.
You're
Or should I
totally
continue?
fine.
I can
You're
continue.
totally fine.
I got
Thank you.
more,
Yeah, thank you so much for
but I
this.
think, yeah,
Sorry, you were saying?
and I feel chopped. Yeah, no, nothing. I think this year moving forward, it's going to be interesting to continue to follow. I want to continue to follow. I think what's happening in Libya right now, because it's just like it's really, I think it's become ground zero for like so many different kinds of sort of like foreign and proxy actors that are really trying to sort of manipulate. And this is all most, it's happening in Arabic. So students and researchers, I think, need to bring some background in Arabic to try and get at it. And so I look forward to working with people in that regard.
Somebody's at the door, not at my
I know.
house.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, no, I would love to hear more, and we're going to have more opportunities to discuss these matters, but we must move on to the teaching aspect, and I will start again with Amal. If you can share with us, Amal, what you are actually teaching, what you have been teaching, the courses you've been teaching, and I will, because of the time constraint, I will ask you at the same time, uh, how has the current environment, which I asked the other professors that I spoke with, how has the current environment in terms of mobilization for social justice of all sorts affected your teaching? Not because, again, we just learned of these issues or it just became heightened in our mind, because I think, knowing all of you, it's always been the case. But how did it affect the teaching, given that the student body and the classroom is much more energized and mobilized, and maybe not in the same direction? So if you can tell us about your coursework and how this new environment affected your courses. So if you can each take about 5 minutes, 5 to 6 minutes to address your teaching, then we'll have a closing remark about any other activities, and I will release you from the MEIS podcast.
Yeah. Sorry, Bassam, I'm sorry for taking too long in the first segment.
No
I'm,
worries at all. No worries at all. It was
I'm
it was
finding
so
it hard.
exciting. It was so exciting that Nate was planning his next course based on what you said.
He's just too kind, he's very kind. But Bassam, please, I find it hard to monitor the time, so stop me. I won't be offended. You can just let me, just cut me off, and I
No,
will stop.
no
Uh,
worries.
and just Nate, in terms of the article about Sadawi, if you want to use it with students who are learning Arabic, it was translated into Arabic. Actually, it was very good translation. So if you want to introduce them to Arabic literary criticism, that will be actually a good one to do that. I mean, anyway, but I found Nate's work, always found it fascinating too, from the moment I interviewed him, right, at George Mason. In terms of teaching, okay, I teach kind of three different kind of courses. I teach a general education course, which is about really Middle East literature, introduction to Middle East literature. This is like a large course that has like 30 students in it, and it's a general ed class. And I love to teach this class. Sometimes I teach a version of it in Nate's department, which is, but then it is focused only on Arabic literature. And I love to teach that because you get students from all specialties at the university. You get a mix of heritage students and non-heritage students, and you always the challenge for me is creating a community in the classroom that allow these two groups of students, or sometimes three groups of students, to debate and talk. And I introduce them to, for some of them, it's the only time they would read anything from the Middle East. So I keep in mind to choose like works that, they're interesting to them, that might stir their interest to follow up. And I'm always happy with teaching that kind of course. Another course I teach is I teach post-colonial literature for English majors, okay, because I'm in the English department, believe it or not, right? So I'm in the English department and I teach that course, post-colonial literature, but always a good segment of it is actually Arab writers or writers from the Middle East and North Africa. I mean, one classic text I teach in that course is Men in the Sun by Ghassan Kanafani. Another classic text is Fantasia by Asa Jabbar. A third text is Seasonal Migration to the North. I mean, these are three classic post-colonial texts that always make it into my syllabus for the English majors. And a third type of course I teach is the graduate seminar. Last semester I taught, or the semester before that, I taught a graduate seminar on gender and sexuality in Middle Eastern literature. And that course I like to teach a small group of students. We get graduate students, so we get to delve into more complicated texts, more challenging issues that maybe things I cannot address, let's say, in a general ed class. So these are the type of classes I teach. I'm going to give you one example to address the question Bassam asked about about the student body. Okay, last spring I taught the general ed class, and one of the books I always teach in that class is I'jam by Sinan Anton, one of his early novels. It's a short, brilliant novel, and I teach that in the in that class. I'jam is about a political prisoner in Iraq who is writing his manuscript without dots in order to avoid censorship of the prison authority and to give himself a space of freedom to criticize, make fun, ridicule the authorities, right? So I teach that book. After the semester ended, and when the attack on Gaza happened, and people were writing about that, one of my students from that class sent me a video that he found that shows how activists writing on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter about Gaza, about Sheikh Jarrah, were writing without dots in order to avoid the censorship of Facebook, Instagram. And the student was like, whoa, this is what we talked about in class. This is what that novel did. And of course, I was excited because exactly, that's what I want you to see, that the literature we study, the works we study, the films that I include, they're relevant to now. They're not just, some fantasy of a writer. These writers really, I mean, especially in Middle East, it's all committed to their communities, societies, and they are experimenting aesthetically too. So I was really excited when just as excited as the student that, and yeah, you could actually see people were writing without dots on Twitter to avoid censorship. So this is what I teach, Bassam. I mean, these are the standard classes I teach. Of course, I change the works. Some books I keep because they work well, like Ijam, like Men in the Sun. Season of Migration in the North, I'm going to leave it for another conversation. It's one of the most challenging texts for me to teach to American students. And we can talk about this some other time. But
Actually, can you tell us why briefly? Just because
I,
you piqued our interest.
Okay, well, I don't know exactly why. I've been thinking about it, right? So, but what I've been noticing is that students avoid writing about it when I give them the options of writing about it. They always choose something else. Very few will write about it. I think there is the issue in the novel, the first half of it, which is about Mustafa Said and his adventures in Britain, right? That reverse journey, right, to the north. And where he is, womanizing and it's having his revenge, right, as the colonial subject, his revenge on British colonialism in Sudan. That is heavily symbolic, that section. And students can relate to it as, okay, this is symbolic. Then you come to the other section of the book, which is about Husna, the local Sudanese woman who is forced to marry an older man and who ends up killing him and murdering and killing herself, right? Because she didn't want to marry him. But that was forced. But that is not symbolic in any way. That is very, like, really graphic realism, if you will. And I think the students get confused between these two. I mean, it's hard for them to see Husna as simply a symbol. Husna is a woman who was terrorized into marrying against her will, and she enacted an act of resistance. And for them, I think and for me also, like, trying to it's hard to reconcile those two modes in the book. I think that's really the best I can do, but I would love to talk to somebody about it. I feel like I need to, maybe we could organize a session, Nate, for MESA or even for the workshop Bassam is talking about, that we talk about texts that work and texts that don't necessarily work in the same way, despite the fact that they are brilliant texts.
Or maybe are just challenging. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, challenging, but challenging in what? Like Fantasia is a challenging text. It's a very difficult text by Asya Jabbar. However, I mean, students appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay, seasonal migration to north, they're stuck, or I'm stuck. Maybe I don't know how to teach it. So I need
No,
help
that's
to
thanks
talk about it.
thanks for sharing with this. And I'm glad you brought up Sinan Antoun. As you probably know, he's a very close friend of mine, and we just had another a panel in which people also addressed that they were assigning his novels. Thanks so much, Amal. I will turn to Nate if you can share with us. I've seen you teach. I've seen the care that you also put in also teaching language and overseeing the language program and testing our MA students for proficiency. So I really appreciate what you do, Nate. If you can tell us about the more topical aspects and whether you also found that the student body has been affected by the recent mobilization nationally specifically, but also beyond.
Yeah, thanks, Bassam. And Amal, MLA is in DC this year, and maybe we
Okay.
should do something. There's still time. There's still time to organize something. Um, that would be awesome because yeah, Tayyib Salah. I mean, I also that's an incredibly challenging text. Season of migration to the north. Yeah, we need to talk more about that. So so with okay, yeah, the Arabic program. I think what's so I I learned Arabic as a non-native speaker, non-heritage, and so I'm very always interested in sort of helping guide students through the like incredibly difficult challenge of تعليم اللغة العربية صح؟ I mean it's I always tell them برنامج طويل ولكن جميل and just it's a lifetime project. So I'm always بالنسبة للغة I'm always a student and a teacher. And George Mason is so awesome, of course, because there are so many. The student body is like so incredibly rich with students that have linguistic backgrounds, across across really so many Asian languages, and of course Arabic as well. In terms of اللغة العربية, the class that I really love teaching is our Arabic media analysis. This is 355 عشان ايه العلم يعني بالنسبة I shouldn't speak in Arabic, but you prompted me to speak in Arabic, so I don't know if it's okay to try. I think people always like to see let's hear what this gringo's Arabic sounds like. But so the media class is a lot of fun, and it's interesting because what we do is we do real time and get real time exposure to Arabic media. So typically I do it in a lab setting, like the computer lab, and it's using what's called in language learning pedagogy incidental learning, where you're sort of discovering new language, discovering new terminology. But the focus in that class is on really discourse analysis, narrative analysis, and trying to understand basically rhetorical and aesthetic patterns as they appear in real time in the media. And then students focus on on certain flashpoint events and how it's covered by 3 or 4 different media. They have generated some incredible projects with that. I've had research that's come out of that. It's so that's an exciting class. I mean, looking at how the embassy move was covered in the Arabic media by 3 different media outlets in real time, and teaching, trying to help students figure out how to sort of index the articles that they're looking at, using, how to do aesthetic analysis as well in terms of the organization of imagery, the use of different sorts of filmic techniques and so forth that appear in news reporting. So that's a cool class that I love to teach, and we can only usually do it once a year, because at the advanced Arabic level, there's typically the classes are pretty small. so at the sort of mid-level, I also teach a translation class. I'm going to teach translation in the fall, which is it's methods, it's translation methods. So it's like the science of translation, and it's very dense and complicated in a way, but it's something I sort of geek out on it, and it again it sort of like fits the mold for a few students, but students that go through this are like through the translation seminar and through the media, and then start to do some of like the more advanced readings in Arabic. I mean, they are really well positioned for exciting opportunities post graduation and in graduate school. And we've had some awesome students from MEIS as well that have like gone on the Jordan program, which we run in the summer. I believe some graduate students from MEIS have also gone on the winter study abroad to Morocco in Rabat, which is awesome. We're building right now a study abroad for Egypt. Hopefully, my colleague Dr. Nagla Hussein, who does really interesting work as well. She's coming out. She did her PhD at Howard. She's from Minya. She works on Black and Nubian literature. But so she's trying to build a study abroad in Egypt, and I'm trying to help facilitate that. And I also teach Arabic literature in translation. I get to do a class that's never as good as Amal's. I always hear from students how much they love her teaching, and I started my love. Actually, I should say I started my love of الأدب العربي بال أكيد, the great Muallim Mahfouz. So that's kind of like a cliche, but it's not. In my mind, Naguib Mahfouz is one of the great writers of the 20th century period. And there's still so much about his work that has not been explored. I had the opportunity to invite into a class before the pandemic, William Hutchins, who translated Awlad Haritna, Children of the Alley. And this guy, William Hutchins, who's done a lot of big translation. I mean, this thing is massive. And he just translated, by the way, Amal, Ibrahim Akoni's The Fetishists, which is like, I mean, it's unbelievable. So it was really interesting to speak with William Hutchins, and then to read who did the translation, and then to be reading Awlad Haritna, in English, reading his translation. I had the opportunity to translate a short story by Mahfouz a couple of years ago, and like had some exchanges with his executors and his sister, and that was amazing. So I remain a committed Mahfouzian, and students who take my classes will definitely get exposure to some of Mahfouz's, some of his lesser works too, that I think are really interesting. Some of like the sort of short, fast, dark comedic novels, Alis wa Kilab, Thief and the Dogs. Sorry about that. So that's it for now.
You have a lot of visitors.
I'm
Okay,
sorry,
so
man. I thought it was
so that
covered.
you're popular. Thank you both so much. We have to wrap up in just like a couple of minutes. So let me thank you very much for this, Nate. I follow what you do with interest, and of course, what Amal has been doing. I've known her for the better part of almost 2 decades. So I would love to hear both of your takes in short form, because you have like a minute or so each, to just share anything that you'd like to announce about any activities you're working on going forward, that have to do with what you're doing outside the classroom as well. Anything that you might not have anything you want to share, but this is an opportunity to share something of the sort, activities that are not necessarily about what you're doing in the classroom, but that do relate to your work and your research and the world we live in. So let's start with Amal. If you give us like about, just a minute, a quick summary of anything you'd like to share.
Well, what I'm doing actually, this is the second year I'm doing the scholarship that Albira Society. Albira is my hometown, and they have a scholarship that they give scholarship to people from Albira or who live in Albira. So Albira community. And I've been actually, I found very satisfying to work, to be one of the to be on the committee. I wrote the application, the announcement for last year. We gave 10 scholarships, not huge amount of money, but significant for people back there. So we gave 6 scholarship to people who are in Palestine, and 4 to people who are here, and we're going to continue to do that. So, hey people, if you are from El Bire or live in El Bire, okay, please apply, because we would love to give scholarships, and it's because Palestinians love education. They're hooked on it, you know, and we like to reward that. So that's one thing I'm doing that has nothing to do with teaching or research, but I love it, and it really connects me to a community and with great people, you know, not academics, but fantastic people.
That's actually great to hear, and it's in terms of anybody who has an inkling of humanity, this is probably one of the most important things to do, especially for a population living under not just occupation, but a form of settler colonialism that is supported by some of the most powerful states in history, not just on Earth. So this is something that is in the direction of supporting social justice, and I hope that you continue to do this work in terms of providing these opportunities for education in one of the most difficult places today. Thank you very much, Amal. And Nate, if you want to share anything, any activities, I'm sure you're doing a lot, but we do have a minute or two if you want to share your bit.
I'll just
Sorry,
share it,
sorry.
and
You have to say that again. This is my fault because I had you on mute because of the background noise. Go ahead.
uh, nothing as significant or interesting as what Amal is doing, and so I hope listeners rewind and check that out, because that's really exciting. No, I have no life outside of work and my children in reality, but I don't know. I'm trying to do. I sort of connected with some groups from like the CLS. I was a critical language scholarship recipient, and there's an alumni association of that is doing media literacy, including for like K through 12. And so I'm interested in that, and trying to help sort of think about it. It's still within the realm of education. I think of it a bit outside of research. Like they're like people trying to figure out like video games and stuff for like combating media, dealing with media literacy and stuff. So I'm interested in that.
I, I have to tell you that when we were interviewing you, when you were actually applying, one of the things, because I had read your file and everything, one of the things I thought about, and of course having known Amal, one of the things I thought about was at Mesa, if you remember. Did you remember that?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Uh,
showed up 2.5 hours late
you
for the
had
interview.
you had trouble because of traffic or something, or your airplane,
No, I
and
was no, yeah, airplane, yeah.
we almost like backed up, but then you came last minute, and of course you were our choice. From that moment, like I was thinking about something that I've always wanted to do, which is work with my colleagues to put together a short play based on a writer, whether it's
Oh,
Munif, or whether it's Sadallah Wannous or
yes.
something, or even a portion of a play. Something that we can do here at George Mason. So I'm putting you both on the spot in a public
Mm.
forum to say, yeah, let's get together and talk about this possibility, because it'll be really powerful if we could reenact even an act of one of these wonderful plays that
Love it.
we
So
teach and offer.
we're acting, or we're acting, or we're directing.
I
We're
want
You
to
not
will
act.
acting.
I love
Right.
acting. I
you
want to
will
act,
you
and I
you will
act.
both be
Also start.
great. No, I mean, I don't know, but I'm telling you
No,
right now, and you both know that when I promise you something, I will do it, even if it's late. I will get in touch with you and see if we could, develop something. That would be wonderful, actually.
Please, Bassam, please. I want to act. Please.
Absolutely,
Good.
absolutely.
no.
I'm telling you, this is something I've been wanting to do for a long time. طيب, thank you both so much for your
But you have to
time.
be in it too, Bassam. Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
أنا ما
He's
عندي
the
مشكلة.
You have
director.
to be in it too.
I'll do whatever you want,
Ah,
and I'm open season. Um,
المخرج ولا yeah.
so I I really want to thank you both for coming on and sharing so much regarding your work and your teaching and your research, and being candid and staying on longer than I promised you. But I hope we can continue this conversation in person. And please join us in about half an hour. Eric McGlinchey and Hatem Al-Hibri are here to talk about their own research and teaching, and I hope to see you guys both soon. And thank you again very much.
Thank you, Bassam. Thank you, Nate.
Thank you. Great to see you.
Good to
Salam.
see you.
وينزداي امتى حفلة امتى؟ يلا.
حفلة دايما في حفلة. There's always but I'll be in touch.
ان شاء الله.
Okay, Habibi. All
Bye
right.
bye.
Thank you both. Thank you
Bye.
both.
مع السلامة.
Let me get
Bye.
thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.